The human diplomat, Marcus, was not prepared for what awaited him on Viranar. He had been selected for this intergalactic mission because of his reputation as a skilled negotiator and problem solver, but nothing could have prepared him for the cold beauty of the alien court. The palace was vast, built from stone that shimmered like a silver mirror under the light of the twin suns. The walls were adorned with intricate carvings, ancient symbols that Marcus could not begin to understand. Everything about the place was designed to show power that belonged to Queen Venara, the ruler of this alien world. Marcus entered the throne room with a sense of awe, despite his best efforts to remain calm. It wasn't his first time at a royal court, but this one was different. The air was thick with tension. Powerful figures stood around the room, all watching him closely, their eyes filled with curiosity and suspicion. Among them stood the Queen. Queen Venere was an imposing figure, even among the tallest beings in the room. Her skin shimmered with a strange iridescence, and her long flowing hair seemed to move of its own accord, almost like it was alive. Her eyes, an unnatural shade of violet, fixed on Marcus as he walked into the room. They were sharp, assessing, and full of ancient wisdom. For a moment, Marcus felt as though she could see straight through him. "I am pleased to meet you, Marcus," the Queen spoke, her voice low and commanding. Her words were polite, but the coldness in her tone suggested she had little interest in him beyond what he could offer to her court. Marcus nodded respectfully. "It's an honor, Your Majesty. I bring greetings from the Galactic Council." The Queen did not respond immediately. Instead, she waved her hand, signaling for him to approach. Marcus stepped forward, his heart racing. He was used to tense situations, but this one felt different. The Queen's presence was overwhelming, almost suffocating. "What is it that brings you to Viranar?" she asked, her gaze never leaving his face. "I come with a proposal," Marcus said, carefully choosing his words. "A solution that could bring peace between the factions here on your world. I know there are tensions between the various houses, and I believe I can offer a way to settle them." The Queen raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. The room fell silent. All eyes were on Marcus, waiting to see how he would present his solution. "I am listening," Queen Venara said, her voice still calm, but with an edge of challenge. Marcus took a deep breath and began to speak, outlining the proposal he had crafted. It was a delicate plan, one that involved delicate diplomacy and the promise of power sharing between the warring factions. Marcus had studied the history of Viranar carefully. He knew that peace could only be achieved if the right balance was struck. It was a risky move, but if it worked, it would secure his place in the galaxy's history. As he spoke, the Queen watched him carefully, her eyes never leaving his. The others in the room exchanged glances, some skeptical, others curious. For a brief moment, Marcus felt as though he were in the middle of a storm. The tension was thick, but he pressed on, explaining every aspect of the plan in detail. When he finished, the room was still. No one spoke, not even the Queen. Marcus felt his heart pounding in his chest, his palms growing sweaty. He had presented his best case, but he knew the true test had not yet come. The Queen would decide whether or not to trust him, and the future of Viranar rested in her hands. Finally, Queen Venara spoke, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Your proposal is interesting," she said, her tone unreadable. "But you are new here, Marcus. You do not understand the full depth of the situation. Things are not as simple as you suggest." Marcus nodded.
"I understand that, Your Majesty, but sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective."
It is the willingness to look beyond old grudges that will allow peace to come. For the first time, the Queen's expression softened. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was there. She studied him for a long moment, her violet eyes searching his face. "You may be right," she said at last, her voice quieter now. "But there is more to this than you know." "You will see soon enough." Marcus wasn't sure if this was an invitation or a warning, but he nodded respectfully and stepped back. The queen stood from her throne, her movements graceful and commanding. The air in the room seemed to shift, the tension hanging thick as she approached him. Without a word, she stepped forward and, in an unexpected move, pulled Marcus into a brief but powerful embrace. The room fell silent. Marcus froze, unsure how to respond. He had expected many things: questions, debates, perhaps even confrontation. But this was unexpected. The queen, a being of immense power, had just embraced him, and the entire court was speechless. Queen Venara held him for a moment longer than was necessary, before pulling away slightly, her eyes still locked on his. "We shall see if your solution has merit, Marcus. But know this, I trust you." And with that, the court's silence was broken, replaced by whispers of curiosity and intrigue. The power dynamics of the room had shifted. Marcus had done something no one else had. He had earned the queen's trust, at least for the moment. As he stood there, still stunned by the embrace, Marcus couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. His mission was far from over, and the path ahead was filled with challenges. But one thing was clear. He had just become far more than a mere diplomat, and Queen Venara had just made him a player in a game that could change the galaxy forever. After the unexpected embrace, the court erupted into hushed murmurs. But Marcus stood still, unsure of what had just transpired. Queen Venara had pulled him into an embrace that left the entire room speechless. She had trusted him in a way no one else had, at least not since he had arrived on Viewership. Her gaze had been unyielding, yet there was something in it that told him she saw potential in him. Still, Marcus knew better than to get too comfortable. The queen's trust was a rare gift, but it came with its own set of dangers. He could feel the weight of all the eyes in the room upon him, judging him, watching for any sign of weakness. Yet, despite the heavy atmosphere, he was determined to prove that his proposal was the right one. As the queen turned away to address her council, Marcus followed her lead, slowly walking to the side of the room, trying to gather his thoughts. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening here, something bigger than just a political negotiation. Queen Venara was no ordinary ruler. Her presence was magnetic, and the way she carried herself demanded respect. He had seen powerful leaders before, but none like her. The council members, a mix of military generals and high-ranking officials, seemed to recover from their surprise. Their eyes were still wary, and a few exchanged uncertain glances, as though unsure of how to treat him after the queen's unexpected display of affection. Marcus could sense the tension in the room, the quiet competition for the queen's favor. One of the generals, a tall alien with silver skin and sharp features, stepped forward. His voice was low and controlled, but there was a hint of challenge in it. "You speak of peace, diplomat, but the factions on Viewership are not so easily swayed by words. How can you promise peace when trust is in such short supply?" Marcus turned to face him, keeping his composure. "Trust is not built in a day," he replied. "It takes time, but it begins with understanding. If the factions are willing to sit at the table, they can find common ground. But only if they see that the future is better when they work together." The general's gaze hardened, but he did not respond. Marcus knew this wasn't going to be easy. He had come here to broker peace, but there were forces at play that were more complicated than anything he had anticipated. As the council continued to debate his proposal, Marcus felt the queen's eyes on him once again. It was a quiet but powerful presence. The queen had not spoken much since their conversation, and yet she seemed to have a way of watching every move in the room, her sharp violet eyes scanning for any sign of weakness or betrayal. He couldn't help but wonder what she saw in him. Later that evening, as the court session ended, Marcus was summoned to the queen's private chambers. He had been anticipating this meeting, but Now that it was here, a nervous energy settled in his chest. He had expected to discuss the proposal further, but he also knew that the Queen was a master of playing the long game. The real conversation was likely to be more than just about politics. As he entered the chamber, he saw her standing near the large window that looked out over the city below. The lights from the capital illuminated the dark sky, and the distant sound of the bustling city reached them through the open window. Queen Venara turned as he entered, her expression unreadable. "I trust your proposal is still intact, Marcus?" she asked, her voice calm and measured. But beneath her words was something more, an unspoken challenge. "Yes, Your Majesty. I believe it is still the best path forward, but I'm also aware that some of your council may not agree." The Queen smiled, a small but knowing smile. "Do not worry about the council. They are stubborn, but they will come around. They always do." Marcus wasn't entirely convinced, but he kept his thoughts to himself. Instead, he focused on the Queen, sensing there was more to their relationship than simple diplomacy. He had seen many leaders before, but this Queen was different. She was powerful, yes, but also strangely distant, like someone who had learned to trust no one. And yet, in their brief encounter, she had trusted him with something precious. "I appreciate your faith in me, Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady. "But I must ask, what is it that you truly want from this peace? It cannot be just the factions. There is something else driving you." "I can feel it." For the first time since their meeting began, the Queen's expression faltered. Just for a moment, the walls she had built around herself seemed to slip away, revealing a hint of something deeper, something Marcus couldn't quite place.
"What I want," she began slowly, "is something that no one here understands.
I want to protect my people, but not just from external threats. There are forces within the court that would tear everything down."
"The peace you speak of, it is necessary, but it is also dangerous. If I lose control of this court, the entire galaxy could be at risk." Marcus nodded, now understanding the full weight of her position. She wasn't just a ruler. She was a guardian, holding the fate of her people in her hands. He could see the strain in her eyes, the unspoken burden she carried. "Then let me help," he said quietly. "Together we can find a way to bring peace, but it has to be done carefully. You don't have to carry this burden alone." For a moment, the Queen said nothing. Then, to Marcus's surprise, she turned away from the window and walked toward him. Without a word, she placed her hand on his shoulder, a gesture of trust that was rare and precious in a ruler of her stature. "You are right," she said softly. "Dispayu."
I don't have to do this alone, but the road ahead will not be easy, Marcus.
"There will be enemies at every turn." Marcus met her gaze, his resolve hardening.
"Then we'll face them together."
The Queen nodded, a quiet determination in her eyes. She had made her choice, and Marcus, despite the dangers ahead, knew that this was the beginning of something that would change the galaxy forever. The days following Marcus's private conversation with Queen Venara were tense but productive. The Queen had taken his words to heart, and they began to work together more closely. The court had not been easy to navigate, but Marcus knew that with Venara's guidance, there was hope for peace. However, as the days passed, it became clear that not everyone in the Queen's circle shared the same vision. The tension between the factions grew more intense, and it seemed as though every step forward was met with resistance. Marcus spent long hours in meetings with the Queen's advisors, trying to find a common ground. Each faction had its own interests, its own demands, and Marcus quickly realized that negotiating with one faction meant upsetting another. Still, he was determined. His mind raced with possible solutions, each one more complicated than the last. The Queen, ever watchful, offered her support, but her presence was often a silent one. She observed, but she rarely intervened, unless it was absolutely necessary. One evening, after another long day of frustrating discussions, Marcus found himself alone in the palace gardens. The air was cool, and the distant sounds of the court seemed muffled. He walked slowly, trying to clear his mind. He had always been a problem solver, but this felt different. The stakes were higher than anything he had faced before. He sat down on a stone bench, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had come to Viranar with a plan, but it was becoming increasingly clear that it wasn't enough. The factions would not simply accept peace. They wanted power, control, and revenge. Marcus knew that if he didn't find a way to unite them, the Queen's reign could be in danger. And if she fell, the entire galaxy could be thrown into chaos.
Out here, alone with your thoughts? A voice interrupted his musings.
Marcus turned and saw Queen Venara standing in the shadows, her figure outlined by the dim light of the garden's lanterns. He had not heard her approach. There was something about her, something that made her presence both comforting and unnerving.
I needed a break,
Marcus replied, standing to face her. I've been running in circles trying to find a way to make this work, but it feels like every step forward is met with another obstacle. The Queen's violet eyes studied him carefully. You're not used to this kind of challenge, are you? She asked, her voice soft, but with a hint of amusement. Marcus paused, considering her question. I've dealt with difficult situations before, but this is different. The stakes are higher here, and I can't shake the feeling that something more is at play. Venara stepped closer, her gaze never leaving his.
You're right, it is different.
And the stakes are high. But there's something more you need to understand.
Marcus looked at her, waiting for her to continue. The factions are not just fighting for power, the Queen explained.
They are fighting for their very survival. Each faction has its own history, its own culture, and their leaders are driven by fear and pride. It's not just about peace, it's about who will hold the future in their hands, and no matter how much you try to convince them, they will not let go of their control without a fight. Marcus nodded slowly. He had suspected as much, but hearing it from the Queen made it feel more real. The factions weren't just power-hungry. They were desperate, and desperation could make people do terrible things. We have to find a way to make them see that cooperation is the only way forward, Marcus said, his voice firm with determination. Venara's eyes softened, but there was a trace of sadness in them as well.
It's not that simple, she said quietly.
Even if they see it, they may not believe it. And even if they do believe it, some of them will never accept it. There are too many secrets, too much blood between them. Marcus frowned. Then what are we supposed to do? Just let the galaxy burn because they can't let go of the past? The Queen stepped closer, her presence more overwhelming than ever. It's not that we let it burn, but we must be prepared for what comes next. Peace is a long road, Marcus, and it doesn't come without sacrifice. The weight of her words hung in the air between them. Marcus realized that the Queen had not just been speaking about the factions. She had been speaking about herself, about the price she had paid to keep her throne. Before he could respond, the sound of footsteps approached. The two of them turned to see a familiar figure emerging from the shadows. It was General Devore, one of the Queen's most trusted military leaders. His stern face was set in a grim expression. Your Majesty, Devore said, bowing slightly, though there was a coldness in his voice. I bring news. The Southern faction has refused our offer.
They are preparing for war. Venare sighed deeply, her shoulders slumping for a brief moment before she regained her composure.
I had hoped for more time, she murmured, but the determination in her voice quickly returned. Prepare the forces.
We will not back down.
Devore nodded and turned to leave, but before he did, he glanced at Marcus. You've done your part, diplomat.
But this is where your influence ends. The court is in the hands of those who understand power.
Marcus's hands tightened into fists, but he said nothing. He knew that Davor did not trust him, but he also knew that the general's opinion didn't matter. The future of Viranar was not in Devor's hands. It was in his, and the Queen's. Once Devor was gone, Marcus turned to Vira, his resolve hardening. We can still stop this. There has to be another way. The Queen looked at him, her expression unreadable. I hope you're right, Marcus. But whatever happens, we fight. Together. With those words, they both knew the road ahead would not be easy. But Marcus was no longer just a diplomat. He was a part of something much bigger. And with the Queen by his side, he was determined to do whatever it took to bring peace to the galaxy. The days after General Devor's announcement were filled with uncertainty. The Southern faction's refusal to cooperate had escalated tensions throughout the court, and the looming threat of war seemed inevitable. The Queen's court, once full of debates and careful diplomacy, had now become a place of silent stares and whispered conversations. Everyone knew what was coming, but no one was sure how it would play out. Marcus spent countless hours with Queen Venara, strategizing, trying to find a way to prevent the coming conflict. Every plan they devised seemed to fall short. The Southern faction, led by the powerful and prideful General Kor, was not interested in negotiation. Kor had been an enemy of the Queen for years, and the bitter history between their factions made peace seem impossible. The Southern lands were vast, their armies strong, and their leaders steadfast in their refusal to bend to the Queen's will. Queen Venara stood by the large windows of the palace, staring out at the stars, her silhouette framed by the soft glow of distant lights. She looked every bit the ruler, calm, confident, and in control, but Marcus could see the strain in her eyes. The pressure was taking its toll, and he could only imagine the weight of the decisions she had to make. I have spent years building this empire, she said quietly, her voice barely more than a whisper. I cannot let it fall now. Marcus stepped closer, his own thoughts heavy with the knowledge that this could be their last chance to prevent war. We can still stop it, he said, though his words sounded hollow even to him. He wasn't sure how much longer they could delay the inevitable. We just need to find a way to reach Kor. Venara turned to him, her violet eyes intense but tired. Kor is too proud. He will never accept peace unless it's on his terms, and his terms would mean the destruction of everything we've worked for. Marcus knew she was right. The Southern faction had always been difficult to control, and their refusal to listen to reason had brought them to this point. But he also knew there had to be another way. What if we try something different? He suggested. What if we offer him something he can't refuse? Something that gives him power, but still keeps the peace. The Queen looked at him, considering his words. And what would that be? Marcus paused, gathering his thoughts. What if we propose a shared leadership? Something that gives Kor influence, but also holds him accountable? It's not about giving him full control. It's about showing him that peace is the best path for his people, too. The Queen didn't answer right away. She walked over to a table, her hand resting on the surface as she thought. It was clear that the idea had merit, but the risks were enormous. Trusting Kor, even for a moment, could lead to betrayal. Still, if there was even a chance it could work, it was worth considering. We could offer him a seat at the table, but the conditions must be clear, Venara said finally. We will not tolerate betrayal. If he accepts, he will have to abide by the same rules as the rest of us. Marcus nodded, feeling a sense of hope that had been absent for days. It's a risk, but it's our best shot. The Queen stood up straight, her posture regal once more. Then it's settled. We will send an envoy to Kor. If he refuses, we will prepare for war. The tension in the air was palpable as Marcus prepared to leave the Queen's chambers. He had hoped for a peaceful solution, but the reality of the situation was beginning to sink in. There were no easy answers. Whatever happened next, he knew it would change everything. The next day, Marcus and a small group of the Queen's trusted advisors traveled to the southern lands to deliver the proposal. The journey was long, and the atmosphere was heavy with uncertainty. Marcus couldn't help but wonder if he was walking into a trap. But he couldn't turn back now. The Queen had entrusted him with this mission, and he would not fail her. When they arrived at the southern stronghold, they were met with cold hostility. The walls were lined with soldiers, their eyes wary and untrusting. Kor himself was nowhere to be seen, but his presence loomed over the fortress. Marcus knew that the general was watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They were ushered into a dimly lit chamber where Kor's second-in-command awaited them. The air was thick with tension, but Marcus remained calm, his thoughts focused on the task at hand. He had to convince Kor that peace was possible. Hours passed as they waited for the general to arrive. Finally, the heavy door opened, and Kor stepped into the room. The general was tall, his face marked with the scars of past battles, his eyes cold and calculating, scanned the room before landing on Marcus.
"You've come to beg for peace, diplomat?"
Kor's voice was low and menacing, carrying an air of authority that made the walls seem to close in. Marcus stood tall, meeting the general's gaze without flinching. "I've come to offer a way forward, a chance to avoid war." Kor chuckled, the sound bitter and mocking. "A chance?
You think I will accept peace on your terms? You know nothing of what it means to fight for survival."
"I know that survival means working together," Marcus said, his voice steady. "And I know that a divided galaxy will never be able to defend itself from the real threats out there." His cold gaze lingered on Marcus, measuring him, weighing his words. Finally, he spoke. "You may have a point, diplomat, but peace comes at a price. And I do not make deals with those I do not trust." Marcus stood firm, his resolve unshaken. "We're offering you a chance to be part of something bigger than yourself, General. A chance to lead. But with honor." Kor stared at him for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. "I will consider your offer, but know this, diplomat. This is not over. Not yet." As Marcus left the chamber, he felt a mix of relief and fear. The door to peace had opened, but it was still uncertain whether Kor would walk through it. Whatever happened next, one thing was clear. The battle for the future of Viranar had only just begun.